good afternoon, good morning, good night, whatever you're doing right now.
It sounds like Jeremy G.
I did get a request to dye my hair black and try and be Colbert on this, and I want to do it, but maybe like episode 15 I'll get up the courage, but we'll have to drink all day before
we will. Yeah.
Anyway, this is James Ward. I'm John Rose.
This is Drunk on Software.
It's really early in the morning, especially for software guys.
We're going with coffee. Cheers.
A couple weeks ago, James got involved in our real development issues. We respect what you do, but it wasn't a demo. But that's one of the first things I want to talk about is I went to yours and other Adobe Evangelist demos and saw you guys pulling down hundreds of thousands of rows and sorting them, and how cool is that? I want to do that. And I put that into an application. And
a real live application.
Well, we haven't sent it to production, but yeah, I'm trying to make this work in a true application, and it definitely came with some pain points, so I wanted to chat through that. We also, after that, want to get some guidelines from James, and then there's some issues we ran into with ArrayCollection that we'll hit on. So,
yeah.
So you do this in a demo. Does Adobe have any kind of general guideline of how much, what kind of data someone should be pulling down that way? Is there any architectural recommendations you guys have, or a general rule?
Yeah. I think Flex is certainly more capable to load large amounts of data over the wire than any other client technology that has significant market share. So it's certainly true that, like my census demo shows, that you can load large data sets, much larger than you can with pretty much any other technology that people are using.
Is that
today.
Primarily because of AMF and the binary protocol?
That's primarily because of AMF and the binary protocol. But certainly there are limits and caveats to what the AMF protocol can do, what the Flex programming model tries to put on you as far as what you run into when you add data binding into your application, and the performance hits because of that.
So is there, it's probably not a number, but is there any kind of rule that you would kind of live by, or is it more taking your data set and doing some benchmarking? And
I don't know if we have a specific rule, and really your use case was the first one that I'd seen where the performance was a problem, and I think that it really came about because there were so many objects that were being created, and what we discovered through your use case was that the overhead that the data binding functionality in ArrayCollection adds is pretty significant to what you get if you're just using the low-level array or vector objects.
So let's jump into that. So, and I've got a blog that I just posted recently. I don't know.
What's your blog?
Ectropic.com, and we'll put a link.
Yep, good call.
I don't want to risk spelling my own blog wrong on camera because that would be embarrassing. But I talk about this, and we both were seeing the consistent, and I think you're probably in your Linux environment or whatever you're running these days, and I was on Mac, and between instancing an array and an array collection, it was 18x.
This was totally different data sets, right?
Well, and I think we both did the test where all we did was instance an array collection and a loop of like 100,000.
No AMF, no data transfer, just a loop.
Yeah.
Creating a ton of objects in an array collection.
Versus an array.
And
it was 18 to 1, and then I saw the same thing.
The array collection was 18 times slower than the array was.
Wow. It's even scarier when you say that now. The obvious reason, right, is all the events and the bindings that fire. And
there's probably, in the creation of a single object into an array collection, I don't know what the number is, but let's say that there's 10,000 events being generated.
Something insane.
Something crazy, because every single piece of that object, is setting all these event handlers and throwing all these events for data binding to work. So the great thing about data binding is, I can have a data grid with, 20,000, 100,000 rows in it, and if I change any single item in that data grid, with code somewhere else, the data grid is going to reflect that change.
Yeah.
But in order to support that functionality, it uses this whole event model that has some overhead to it. And what we discovered was that overhead is basically an 18x performance hit when you want data binding to work on Yeah.
Well, and to your point though, these are things that save us much time in Flex, and one of the real niceties, even though it comes with some potential huge performance pitfalls and other things, but obviously data binding is a huge part of why Flex is nice to program in.
Yeah.
To explain the problem a little more, basically we were seeing this huge lag from when Blaze finished to when we got to our result handler. And that's where it got interesting, because we saw the same 18x performance using arrays versus array collection there. And the interesting thing about that is you have little control over that.
Yeah.
There is a global setting on the Blaze DS channel
or LCDS.
Yeah.
Either product.
Yeah, and I think it's the same setting. It's
Legacy Array or something.
Yeah, which is a funny name. You guys should change that to like Primitive or something, because it made me feel like I was out of school or out of the times. But I guess I'm just old school.
Using the old school arrays.
Yes.
Wow.
Which that solution actually ended up being what we went with. We ran into a number.
So what you're saying is that Blaze, the response came out of the Blaze server.
Yeah.
But by the time your result event handler on the client side was being called, there was significant delay.
Significant.
So we narrowed down that it wasn't the Blaze server, it wasn't the network transfer.
Yeah.
It had to be when the objects are actually being turned from AMF into actual objects on the client.
And through this week of, we've all been in those performance hell weeks, and there was a number of things, but this was the thing that
was the
ultimately
primary.
fell on. Well, no, it actually wasn't even the primary, but it's the main one that fell in Flex.
Right.
But the interesting thing is when you first start, you're like, the Java call's done and it doesn't get the Flex, Blaze is broke. And so, you start getting into it, and we see that Blaze is the problem, and I never would have guessed the problem would have been
client side, because we always talk about how fast Flex is.
Yeah, and it didn't seem intuitive at first. It was pretty obvious once we put a server filter around Blaze, like, oh, it's finishing here.
Yeah.
What's it doing the rest of this time? And then start debugging into the Flex code. But,
so, and just to let people know, how dramatic this impact was. How long, and how many objects were being created on the client side? And
I should have given more background on this up front, but we've got, I can't come up with a better word off the top of my head, but then a perverse kind of data model. And
perverse data model. Is that how Eric Evans would describe it?
Eric, I love Eric's stuff, and I have no responsibility for the data model, but I'm still kind of ashamed because I'd love to follow more of that mantra. But regardless, whatever, we all get these situations, and sometimes they're for legitimate requirements problems, and sometimes they're for other reasons. But so whatever, we've got this kind of strange data model, and we really have a large tree and a lot of one-to-many, many-to-many associations, so a lot of collections.
Yeah.
So we were seeing, depending on the size of the record, 20 seconds to a minute, and so
20 seconds to a minute to do the client side.
Yeah, so you can obviously do that math out there, and you divide by 18, and that gets looking, from a perception standpoint, that's a huge leap forward when you're going, okay, there's 2 minutes in this total request, and maybe 30 seconds of that's query time that needed optimized and whatever, but you change one setting on Blaze and boom, obviously we broke a lot of code because, like we said, there's a lot of niceties in array collection that we were dependent upon. So going down the array collection road a bit.
So and then how many objects did you guys actually
Probably around 1 million.
Okay, so this was taking 1 million objects and deserializing all that AMF into array collections and essentially like adding a ton of objects to a ton of array collections all at once, and that's where.
And it seemed almost exclusively related to array collection because I did a bunch of you start getting into, okay, well, what does this really mean? And it was a demo fake that I saw, and it obviously was not. And I can say,
well, the census demo is interesting in that it takes a flat data model of 20,000 records at the most.
Yeah.
And so we're only talking about 20,000 objects, and 20,000 objects, of course, happens very fast, but if when you go from 20,000 to 1 million,
but if I pump your census demo up to 1 million strings,
then
it's still almost. In most cases, we all need our performance requirements to know what's acceptable, but it's not like user go get a cup of coffee slow. It's reasonable for what you're pulling down, and when you think of the trade-offs. So it's not just the number of objects; it really was the hit on instant array collection, obviously,
Right.
since we saw that even outside of anything.
Right.
So once we took care of that, there was a little bit, just tiny bit of optimization we had to do to lop off a part of the tree that became unusually large for what the data was. But we cut off one small branch on the tree that was resulting in 500,000 objects.
Right.
Got rid of, went to arrays versus array collections, and the flex performance issues that we were facing really were largely resolved.
That's good.
And we haven't. I thought we would feel more pain from going to arrays.
Right.
This would be a place where really strong typing would have. I'm not a typing bigot. I like that you kind of have both in Flex.
Well, Vectors in Flash Player 10 has typed array support.
Well, I just mean language typing in the sense that,
Right.
I didn't change that get item at, but it's still compiled for me,
Right.
So you're occasionally finding, we talked recently about FlexMonkey, and we don't have a lot of coverage yet. So we didn't have, did I just say that on camera? I'm kind of ashamed. But that was kind of one of those where it's like, oh, I didn't catch that one. But so the other interesting part of this with array collection, and I blogged about this too. I don't think I posted yet, but I was surprised when I got into array collection, because my first instinct once we said array collections to blame and we were certain of that, I wanted to really do this just through changing my typing and extension, and overall I've been just blown away by how extensible Flex is for a UI framework coming from the Java side, where if you get a component, any set of real components, you're lucky. And then to the idea of just doing a normal extension and overriding true OO is it didn't even occur to
UIs,
me. Didn't even occur to me that people could code UIs that way. But this was a case of the opposite, where I tried and extend array collection, and there is a property on array collection to disable the events, disable auto updates. Well, it's kind of hard to do that when it's in the Flex lifecycle before it ever gets to your code. So because
what's happening is that the Blaze and LCDS client-side libraries, they control this stuff for you. So you'd have to. Did you try monkey patching, or is that just too messy?
It looked pretty messy. That's certainly what would have been an option. We were in a drop dead date situation, and by the time we kind of talked to the Adobe engineers and saw that as a potential solution, we already kind of committed to the array thing, and it was ugly. I mean, it was a solution, but because we basically would have had to hook into the Blaze or the client side Blaze code.
You have to monkey patch the Blaze client side,
and it's not like there's once again not a clear extension point to say I want to override this. You extend the entire serialization process and provide a serializer, and you're providing the default, but you're still writing all this code. And I would like to upgrade to Flex 4 someday. Those are the kind of things, in my experience.
3.02.
In my experience, that you start getting into a lot of trouble.
Monkey patching is definitely dangerous. It's not the most maintainable.
But so I was surprised with Array Collection that it doesn't have its own interface. Its parent class, its superclass does. But
iCollection view.
So I wanted to delegate. I wanted to basically tell my class, if I have a team with players, that players is my, John Rose's Array Collection, and tell it to not do the auto updates, and that would. And not even or even lazy load, lazy initialize.
Is it possible to use bean proxies or override the Blaze mapping in any way?
Kind of. It's the same kind of. It's to intervene, unless we missed it. Seemed like the similar thing as the client side, where you're extending, and there's not like this easy extension point. You provide, the top level serializer class, and then you get down into extending it enough times where you finally get a hook in your logic, and that's actually. RFM, I didn't find the setting right away, and we wrote code to do this on the Blaze side and to convert to arrays, and then we threw away that code and changed the one Boolean. Unfortunately, it's for the whole channel, which is I put a feature request in that we'll put a link to also that to have this option. I suggested remote object. I don't know where it fits, where it would make the most sense, but it seems to me I should be able to
have a more granular control over what the mapping is.
Or also seems to me that firing these events during that part of the life cycle would not make a lot of sense, and Flex should just do this for me.
Well, and this is one of those data binding things where we discovered in an earlier performance problem that we ran into that if you're in this really tight loop and you're updating in this really tight loop that's running a ton of times, updating a bindable variable, your performance really degrades quickly. And it'd be nice if binding was just able to know, hey, there's no way that I need to update the UI, 300 million times in a second.
Yeah.
So let's just wait until after we get out of this loop. Let's suppress these events for a while, and then just fire, somehow combine all those events into one meaningful event or something.
Well, and that seems like a non-trivial problem.
Seems like a very non-trivial problem.
But yeah, I mean, it comes back to you've got this nice magic box that's doing all these things for you, and
data binding.
Yeah,
it's a magic box. Yeah.
Yeah, and at times that's always going to cause you pain, and then when it's causing you pain, it's a black box.
Yeah.
Generally, I mean, certainly see the code it actually generates and get some understanding of how it's working, and surprisingly, actually kind of obvious how it's working. But we don't need to get totally off the tracks. But yeah, I mean, that would be cool. But outside of that, I guess I was going to go off on array collection a bit and just say, it'd be really nice in Flex 4 or whenever this makes sense that had an interface so that I can implement my own. Because seemed to me the easy solution was hold the array but delegate, lazy instantiate it when somebody wants something from it.
Yeah.
And then I wouldn't have had to change a whole lot of my client-side code and taking that risk of all the things that we potentially broke. And it didn't end up being that bad, honestly, but I was real hesitant to go with that solution.
That's an interesting point, is that I've been trying to think about this lately. When should we be using data binding? Is binding your data to your UI really the best approach? Other than in demos. I mean, it's great for demos because
I think it's a great approach. Honestly, it's just that until you really get into the guts of Flex and start trying to see what it can really do, you don't get a sense of what's really happening on those bindings.
Right.
But I don't have the full list, but in my top 5 reasons why I still really love Flex, even though the pain is one is always going to be the component library. I'm sure plenty of people will point to, X has got a great component library, but in my experience, this kills everything, and it's elegant, and outside of a really interesting requirement, I don't have to build my own components, and that to me is killer. And then number 2 would probably be data binding, because it's such a convenient way, and more often than not, it's your friend. I mean, this is a very rare case, and the fact that it was data binding wasn't really even apparent because we weren't even really into our Flex code.
Right.
It's more that it may be just
it's the underlying infrastructure required for data binding that really threw us off.
And that, unlike trying to figure out when you're firing all these events and you're really in your client side, that seems like a very non-trivial problem.
Yeah.
Unless I'm missing something, it would seem trivial to kind of disable event things during this lifecycle blaze part of the client side thing, because be hard to see where they would ever make sense. I may be, like I said, I may be missing something. But it seems to me they could just disable that for me. Maybe give me a property if I wanted to turn it on. I don't think anybody ever would. But and then this problem would be pretty much gone, because you'd get your data back, your events wouldn't have fired,
and then you can say, all right, let's tell the UI about this.
Would seem like it could be that trivial, but maybe I'm wrong. So anyway, I'm glad we were able to get some of your time that week, because it wasn't very apparent that it was the array collection, and it took some time to get to that point, and then it was pick your least favorite option, your favorite least favorite option, and move on. So anyway,
cool. All right, well,
we'll see you next time. As Colbert and Stewart.
We hope so. All right, thanks for watching.